Welcome into our Locked On NBA Bets Insider Report. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. We've got Dave Mason from BetOnline.net with us, the Sportsbook brand manager. So he's going to fill us in on some of the things that we need to know going to the NBA playoffs, where to put our money and where the smart bets are going to be. There's a lot of teams, we're going to start out in the East, that could be contenders for the championship, and a lot of them we're trying to avoid playing the Nets in the first round. The Celtics ended up playing them. BetOnlines are still in the Nets' favor, I believe, at this point at 130. But how do lines get made with a team like that, with the Nets have a ton of potential, but they haven't necessarily shown it so far?
Yeah, I mean the Nets are a tricky one. They're so darn talented, with KD and Kyrie, and when they're on their game, they're the best in the NBA. But they're so darn inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
They opened the favorites to win this series, about minus 125, I believe, and that got flipped. I mean, the Celtics are minus 137 right
Okay.
now. The Nets are now the plus 117 dog to win the series. But yeah, I mean, this is such an interesting first round matchup because the Celtics should be playing somebody that they're a bigger favorite
Mm-hmm.
over, but they're not. I mean, the Nets are just so good. So it's, close to a darn pick 'em when I'm sure Celtics fans wishing they were playing a team that has more of a long shot. I mean, you look at the Eastern Conference standing odds. I mean, the Bucks are the
Mm-hmm.
favorites at plus
Right.
225. Then the next two teams are the Celtics and the Nets at plus 325 and plus 375. So, if either of those teams are playing a lesser team, they'd be the favorites to win the East and not the Bucks, but it's not so. So one of the favorites are going to be eliminated here in round one.
You mentioned the Bucks; they're the biggest favorites right now at negative 1,200. What goes into a decision to make the odds so big like that? Obviously, they're the defending champs, but is it just because they have an easier, opening round matchup or the easiest road?
Yeah, I mean they're huge favorites over the Bulls to win their series. Like you said, minus 1,400. They're the defending champs. They're the plus 225 favorites to come out of the East. And the Bulls, they started it off the year so darn hot. They
Mm.
won the best records throughout the first half of the season, but since February 26th, they're 7-15 outright, and this 5-17 against the spread, I believe. Whereas the Bucks are 15-7 over that same time span. So, the Bucks are the Bucks. We know who they are. They're one of the top teams in the East, if not the top team. They're the defending champs, and the Bulls, they're not. They're playing like a lottery team now, and not a playoff team, and that hence the crazy minus 14 odds on the Bucks to win the series.
In a different series, we'll go out west now, where there's a little bit more of a back and forth on it. We'll talk about the Jazz and the Mavericks. Obviously, a ton of that goes around the health of Luka Doncic. With that calf strain, we don't know how serious it is, how it's going to affect his play. That affects obviously the Jazz's odds to win this series. So, how does the health of a star like that kind of affect the line when you guys are making odds in the postseason versus maybe a one game situation?
Yeah, I mean it's huge, especially a guy like him. He's an all
Hmm.
NBA all NBA performer. It's not like
Hmm.
he's one of the just a solid role player.
Right.
This guy is one of the best in the NBA, top five players, I guess. So it's huge. Yeah, the Jets are now minus 310 to win the series. The Mavs are plus 260. If Doncic wasn't injured, the Jazz would probably be right around minus 160, minus 170, minus 180 or so. And the
Okay.
game one would be a pick instead of
Right.
Jazz minus five. So it's huge.
When we get to the playoffs, obviously there's some teams involved that maybe don't get the national coverage as much. When you're looking at a series like Minnesota and Memphis, not everybody's familiar with those teams, right? They don't necessarily
Right.
know them as well as you would like a Lakers team that you see on TV all the time. Not that they're involved in the postseason, but
Right.
how does BetOnline kind of put numbers on something like that when they know that maybe the public doesn't have as much intel into it? How does BetOnline go about doing that?
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. I mean,
Okay.
we're well aware of them, whereas
Yeah.
some and the serious NBA bettors, the guys have been betting all
Right.
year. They know about it. I mean, John Moran. I mean, you can't turn on
Yes.
highlight film. I mean, he might. I bet he. I don't know if they keep stats anymore, but if I guarantee he made ESPN top 10 more than anybody other player this year. So, um, Whereas the casual guy bettors might not be aware of the guys that are just coming into the playoffs, but the serious NBA bettors know about them. We sure as heck know about them. So it's not going to affect the odds at all. It might affect the volume we take in. I doubt these games get bet as much as like the Celtics Nets. That being
Okay.
said, Celtics Nets games will probably be getting bet more than any of these games. But so there is a hierarchy there that it might not get as much volume, but the odds will be tight. They'll be sharp.
Over in the West as well, we're looking at the Warriors, who are favorites right now against the Nuggets. A lot of that's going to depend on Steph Curry, which we're hearing, he may play, he may not play. How, obviously that's going to affect the line, whether or not he plays, because he's such a dominant player. But how much do you guys kind of have to follow those reports and really be on it and kind of see what, his
All
playing
right.
stats?
Yeah, I mean, once again, injuries are just such a big thing, and our guys
Mhm.
have to be all over these injuries. And NBA is just such a tricky thing during the
Yeah.
regular season with these stars sitting out left and right. So our guys are trained; they know what they're doing. It's probably they're more experienced in this than ever now with players sitting out and sitting out with little minor injuries. It's not like it was 10, 15 years ago. I hate sounding like an old fuddy duddy, but these new players are just sitting out left and right. So,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, the odds on the series in game one are kind of shaped to where he is going to play. We're expecting him to play game one. I believe he's probable. He's on track. Doubt he gets full minutes unless he needs to. So they're minus 6.5 point favorites game one. The series price on them is minus 250. If he wasn't playing, if he was out, the Warriors would probably be minus 2.5 without Curry. But so it's looking like he'll play, but absolutely, it's just something we have to be on top of and be all over Twitter and looking for those game reports on our system.
One of your closer series probably in the opening round is going to be Raptors 76ers right now. What about 76ers were dominant earlier in the year. The Raptors have been pretty solid, but what about them, has made those numbers so close? Is it just how they played each other during the regular season?
Yeah, well, there's a few factors there, and I'm a Philly guy, so I'm a little bit more nervous than I thought I'd be. If you told me,
Yeah.
a little while ago that we'd be playing the Raptors opening round, I'm like, all right, that's a bye. But no, man, I mean the Raptors
Right
are
now. Yeah.
give them credit, right? I mean the Raptors have been red hot lately. They've won, I think, 14 out of the last 18
Yeah.
games. No Matisse Thybulle for the Sixers. I mean that's one of our starters. Great lockdown defender. Doesn't give you much in the offensive side, but he's a great lockdown defender. We won't be with him when the games are in Toronto. That impacts it. And Toronto has owned Philly this year. They're 4-0, both straight up and against the spread versus Philadelphia this season, and they were a dog each time. So they whatever it is, they really bring it against the Sixers team. And like every Sixers fan, when Philly got James Harden, they were playing great. We were ready. We're sharpening our scissors, ready to cut down the nets, and he's been disappointing lately too. They just haven't been. There was that first honeymoon phase when he joined the Sixers, and they were playing great together, and it just like, oh man, this is gonna be the team to beat, and that was short lived. I think when the Nets beat the heck out of them in Philly, and they just came back down to earth. I don't know what, but those four factors. I mean, I'm nervous as heck being a Sixers fan that this series.
Think anything could happen in the East, it feels like, and I wouldn't be surprised. So that'll definitely be fun for the bettors. We suggest everybody goes to betonline.net to put in their bets, get in on this NBA action. Dave Mason, Sportsbook brand manager, thank you for your wisdom. We appreciate it. Catch you next time. This is Locked On NBA.